I'm very pleased to be invited here by EJ. I am reminded of the event that we conducted in Manhattan that Tuesday in September 11 years ago, and I remember going back on Acela and looking back at the World Trade Center and thinking what a magnificent pair of buildings those are. It left a deep impression on me, and thought about it a lot yesterday too. We've been doing our competitiveness index since 2001. And that very year. And we have our definition of competitiveness is that a state is competitive if it has in place policies and conditions that ensure and sustain a high level of per capita income and its continued growth. Of course, that leads to the question, what are these conditions? We did key our index off of the work of Michael Porter at Harvard Business School, who developed this an index of his own for global rankings of competitiveness. And but we did our work all ourselves. We did not collaborate with Porter, so he doesn't get any blame for what we've done. I'll talk to you about some differences between our index and ALEC's index and others. I think there is a certain category that we fit into and that they may fit into, and who's to say which is better. It also occurred to me as I was sitting there listening that one of the things that complicates this is that bad government policy is kind of a luxury. That states that are competitive because of, say, the presence of MIT, which is never going to move to North Carolina, states that are competitive because of those sorts of things, natural resources and other things, can't afford bad policies more than states that are not so competitive. Hernando de Soto, not the explorer, but the Peruvian economist, has talked about how environmental standards, for example, are much higher in rich countries than in poor countries because rich countries can afford them more. It makes it all that much more complicated to figure out what drives competitiveness. I took this definition from the World Economic Forum, which ranks countries, and their work is keyed off of Porter too. And they are what this slide says, an independent international organization funded by business, and their members are as they say on their website, driving the companies that are driving the world economy forward. And their index was, as I just said, I think inspired by Porter's work. And this is how they define competitiveness. They're talking about productivity. And in their case, since they're looking at countries, it's countries that are productive, that can support the sorts of rising living standards and high wages that everyone is looking for. That's our philosophy, too. I discovered this quote after we started ours. I think our index is older than theirs by quite a few years. But that's how they look at it. That's how we look at competitiveness in terms of high living standards, in terms of productivity. Interestingly, we did dig up this slide that sees the United States as a whole falling from 1st to 7th since 2008. I think I may turn this over to the Romney campaign. Okay, I'm sorry. I have to remember sometimes that I'm not always talking to Republicans. So, which there are a few of in Massachusetts, you understand. I mean, we have a very small community there. We rank the 50 states on their abilities, really, bottom line, to sustain a high level of personal income. And we've done, as I said, since 2001. We see that there are differences between these indexes, of course. There are business climate indexes, such as the Tax Foundation, productivity indexes or indices such as ours. We see quality of life indices, Forbes, tax and regulation indices such as ALEC. We, again, try to capture the productivity of a particular state. Massachusetts is more prosperous than Mississippi because it is more competitive and therefore more productive. And Mississippi, by the way, I think ranks last in our latest index. So here's some charts. There's a chart on real GDP growth in recent years. As you can see, U.S. Massachusetts, which I put in because Massachusetts ranks first. Not that we want it that way, but it just happens to. And it shows you some comparisons of real GDP growth. It looks like New York has slipped slightly below the U.S. and Massachusetts in 2011. Our data only go through 2011. And something about per capita real GDP by state. New York in 2007 reached to 53,239 and has slipped slightly now. But it's still pretty close, considering that this is still in effect, a recession year, and 2007 was pre-recession. I do believe that the country is effectively still in a recession. So it's actually, New York has actually caught up pretty well. And in fact, it's obviously exceeded the U.S. U.S. real GDP per capita by a substantial margin. It's neck and neck almost with Massachusetts. And here is unemployment by state. We see here that the red line is New York. Let's see, do I mean that? No, the dotted yellow line is New York, and its unemployment rate as of 2011 was slightly higher than Massachusetts, but substantially below the U.S. unemployment rate. All right, so let's get to the bottom line. We put New York at 29th. It's relevant, I think, that we are close to the Forbes and the CNBC indexes, and that's because I think there's a fundamental difference between those three and the next three on the slide. The top three, I think, are more about overall productivity, overall business climate, including natural resources, quality of the labor force, importance of technology. We have MIT, again, which if it moved out of Massachusetts, we would probably fall to last. We have those, we factor those things into our index, and with the other three, the Tax Foundation, Small Business Survival Index, and the ALEC Index, are more focused on policy variables. Again, not to say that ours is right and theirs is wrong, not at all. It just depends on what you think is important. We do have a test of ours, which I'll show you later, where we try to show how good a job our index does at explaining per capita personal income. But I think that when you have an index such as the first three on this list that includes lots of quality of life issues, indices, where technology is important, where such things as environmental quality is important, such things as that which are not directly and immediately affected by policy instruments, you're going to see New York ranking higher. Other indexes which are focused like a laser, as I think Alex is, on such things as marginal tax rates, regulations, such things that directly affect business, New York ends up ranking lower. Massachusetts is first. Interestingly, another wasteland, North Dakota, is second. Colorado third, and so on. So you can see the rankings there. The numbers in parentheses are the value of the index. And this index is constructed by taking our 8 sub-indexes for each state, normalizing them so that they have a mean of 5 and a standard deviation of 1, and then creating an average of those 8 sub-indexes. So ours is a simple average of the 8 sub-indexes that we create, each of which is, as I said, normalized, so it has a mean of 5 and a standard deviation of 1. What this really means is this. If you look, for example, at Massachusetts, the fact that it has a score, an overall competitiveness score of 7.34, that's a really high score. 2/3 of the observations on this index, as we created, are between the values of 4 and 6. So if you're above 6, you're doing really well. If you're below 4, you're not doing very well at all. And you can see how, in the case of Massachusetts, North Dakota, Colorado, and so on, where those index numbers are high, that despite the confused look of that slide, which I can't explain, you can see how those states are doing very well. Now, here is a slide that gives you some idea of the strength of various states. There doesn't seem to be any terrifically obvious regional pattern, except the Rust Belt, all those green states there, Illinois and so on, are not doing so well. Neither are some of the Deep South states. Neither is New Mexico, and so on. Then we have the dark red states, such as Massachusetts, and then North Dakota, that no longer South Dakota, but North Dakota, and Colorado are doing much better than the rest of the country. Doesn't seem to be any obvious regional pattern, except for the Rust Belt, Deep South states. Here's how New York has fared over the years. It's gotten better on our index. Started at 40th. Well, that doesn't go back to 2001, but we just picked those more recent years, and it's gotten better was 40th in 2005 and now is at 29th. Okay, so we're going to go through these individual sub-indexes one at a time. Here they are. These are, again, government, security largely having to do with crime, infrastructure, and so on. You can read them yourself. And those are the 8 sub-indexes that we compute these indexes for, and then we average across states to get an overall ranking for the state. So where does New York have a problem? Government and fiscal policy. We would be consistent here with ALEC in that when we look at government, we don't see a lot of good things to say. Infrastructure, also a problem. Business incubation, which I will talk more about, another problem. In other areas, New York is doing much better. And I'll talk about these individually as I go through them. So let's start with government and fiscal policy. So this 2.71 now is the value of the index, and since it's way below 4, this is a bad number for you. This suggests that, again, one reason why New York ranks so low on that sub-index. On the other hand, bond rating is good. You're very good about, according to this, about controlling your budget. Budget surplus over gross state product gets a pretty high number, 5.45. But you have a problem with too many government employees, full-time equivalent state and local employees per person, 4.14 it's not below 4, but it's close enough to 4 that it indicates that there's an issue. And overall, on this index, you're at 3.62, which, again, is a bad number for government and fiscal policy. Again, I think the interesting thing from your point of view, if I were you, is I would say, well, this ratifies the indexes such as ALEC's, which are focused more on policy variables than on overall climate. Infrastructure, well, mobile phones is maybe that's sort of an obsolete indicator since everybody has mobile phones now, even in South Dakota. Sorry, EJ. But it's there, and internet lines, air passengers. Average travel time to work, though, Massachusetts doesn't look so good on that either. You get a low ranking on that. Electricity prices, low ranking. And I don't know why we didn't circle apartment rental, but that's a low number too. And you get a 4.69 overall on that, which is it's above 4, obviously. So therefore, in the 2/3 of the observations that fall between 4 and 6, but it's problematical. Business incubation. This is kind of a hodgepodge of things. Bank deposits per capita, venture capital, employer firm births per capita, IPO volume. We think unions are bad for the economies, so Massachusetts gets a bad score on this, as do you, percentage of the labor force in unions. Minimum wage, actually you don't do so badly, but that's because, as I understand it, your minimum wage is the same as the federal minimum wage. Some states like Massachusetts think that we can't put enough people out of work, so we have a higher minimum wage than New York does. Nothing like imposing minimum wage laws in order to drive teenagers and minorities out of the labor market. Tort reform, you don't do very well at all on that. You're not. This is the Pacific Research Index of tort reform that we're simply using here. And then you have, in terms of your standardized wage rate, you're below 4 on that. That's in terms of your real wage rate. And so overall, sort of mediocre. Now, let's, so those were the indexes where we found problems. And now we're going to look at you in comparison to other states. So let's see. What we've done is take the regional, we've taken the region, which there are other ways we could have done this too. We could have compared you with the South. We could have compared you with California. But this is what we decided to do, take this eastern region and compare you to other states. On the left, you'll see where you have a strength or a weakness. And on the right, you'll see where you rank overall, and then you'll see where other states in this region also rank. So you're 46, New Jersey is below you, Vermont is low, and on this is of course on this sub-index, this is not on the overall index, on this particular government sub-index, most of these states actually don't look very good, except for New Hampshire, the live free or die state. still manages to be have a kind of a libertarian sort of philosophy. And I see my time is running out, so I better get moving here. In terms of security, you are 33rd, which is not great. This is mostly about crime rates and such. Infrastructure, this includes things like average time to work, and we've mentioned this before, in electricity prices. You rank badly there. Human resources, in the middle of the pack. Massachusetts is number 1. We just have an awful lot of college graduates. That, of course, is biased by the fact we have an awful lot of colleges, but we have a high-quality labor force by our standard, and you're in the middle of the pack. Technology, New York is high. It does very well in that area, and that's measured by things like patents that are taken out, by the number of grants coming in from the National Institutes of Health, for example. It's one of the variables that fit under that. And New York is low in terms of business incubation, and that is largely driven by the fact that you're so heavily unionized. You don't do particularly well on tort law either, and you don't do as well as Massachusetts does on venture capital. I don't have that index there, but I know that for a fact. So then we move to openness, which one of the things that is important to us in terms of openness is exports, foreign direct investment, and population born abroad. We think lots of immigrants are good for competitiveness. Certainly they're good for Massachusetts in terms of competitiveness because they come and get their PhDs and then sometimes stick around and invent things. So we see immigration, we treat it as a plus for competitiveness, and you do very well on that, it's just as we do in Massachusetts. And in environmental quality, you're in the middle of the pack, and other states are not doing so well, such as Pennsylvania, New Jersey. So here are where you have the biggest issues. High taxes relative to personal income. That's not a marginal tax rate, but it does give the person an idea. If he's thinking about moving to New York from another state, gives the person the idea that he's going to pay a big share of his income in taxes. That's a deterrent to moving to New York. It's a deterrent to opening up businesses in the hope of getting people to move to New York to take jobs. Have a weak bond rating. You have a lot of government employees. There's a problem with crime in New York State, according to this. I suppose most of that is New York City. Infrastructure, again, you've seen these things: travel time to work, electric prices, apartment rental rate, and then in these areas of wage rates, business incubation wage rates are high. Tort index people suing each other for a living is a problem in New York, as is unionization. Now, what we try to do is test the validity of our index. And so we run a regression across the states of real per capita income on the index to see what kind of a fit we get. There are the observations. There's the regression line. It has a pretty low R-squared. We explain only 23% of the variation in competitiveness between states with real personal income. I'm sorry, I had that backwards. We explain only 23% of the variation in real personal income by looking at competitiveness. But it's a cross-section regression, and that's not surprising for regressions like that. They frequently have low R-squares, so we think ours is defensible. So here's what we come up with, that a one-unit improvement in the competitiveness index adds $1,893 to per capita income in real dollars in every state. So we took a look at New York, and we asked the question, New York ranks 29th, as you know, with this index of 4.53. Here are the 4 areas in which it's weakest: fiscal policy, security, infrastructure, and business incubation. What if we raised all of these 4 indexes to 5? What if New York succeeded in bringing all of these up? Say it brought up the fiscal policy index from 3.62 to 5, so it would be in the middle of the pack. What if it raised the security from 4.78 to 5, and so on? What if it raised all those to 5? If it did that, then New York would go up to 13th. From 29th, it would go up to 13th, and its index would be 5.77. That would be a huge change, huge improvement in its competitiveness. Using our regression equation, we find that real personal income, this is income per person, would rise by $2,350 per year. Everybody would be $2,300, $2,400 better off if New York was successful in raising these four indexes up to the average. That would increase real personal income in New York State by $46 billion annually, which is a useful number, I think, to have. So with that, I will conclude, and thank you again for having me, and welcome your questions later.